open it and stick your head out and yell, I'm as mad as hell, and I'm not going to take this anymore.
I don't want to abolish government. I simply want to reduce it to the size where I could drag it into the bathroom and drown in the bathtub.
You bet I cut the taxes at the top.
How dare you? How dare you? Go ahead, make my day.
The Rick Smith Show starts now.
Heroes, this is the Rick Smith Show. Thanks so much for being here today on the big program. Really one thing to get to, one thing to talk about, and that is the Treason Summit, the Surrender Summit, whatever you want to call it, whatever it was that Trump did today. That's kind of really what's front and center, the focus of most of my thoughts today. And look, this is one of those moments where who was it? Was it Maya Angelou who said, when someone tells you who they are, believe them? This is one of those moments where you look at this guy who is the president and you look at what he did and you believe him. Now we finally have to go, this guy's either one, completely off his rocker, or two, he's a Russian asset. I mean, is there middle ground? I would love to hear some thoughts on yes or no. And it's this moment. And I remember, the first several months of the Trump presidency, you had, all these commentators, like Van Jones and others going, today, he read off the teleprompter, he was presidential. Is this a day where we can finally say that this guy is not a legitimate president, that this guy does not have our best interests at heart, and that anyone who supports him going forward is either a mouth-breathing, knuckle-dragging moron or is complicit, or is fully in bed and fully on board with destruction of all of our institutions and the end of our democracy, the end of this wonderful experiment of self-rule? There's no option at this point going forward, given what we saw today in Helsinki. And the thing that gets me, and I spent a little time today looking at Republicans' comments because Republicans really flipped out. And, maybe there's some, who knows, maybe there's hope. Maybe this was the one where they go, oh man, this was bad. And they go, election's coming, we should probably do something. Even Fox News was calling this display a disgrace. Even Fox News. So when I saw the comments, Paul Ryan, for instance, said, no question that Russia interfered in our elections. My first thought was, maybe you should tell your base. Maybe you should tell all these idiots who go, no, they didn't do anything. They didn't change my vote. Maybe tell the people who follow you. And then answer me the question of, what the hell you been doing the last 18 months? If we know this and we knew it from the beginning, what have you been doing? The answer is nothing. And I spent more time, the Representative Vern Buckwell, Republican from Florida. Russia is not a friend. There is no dissent inside U.S. intelligence agencies about the conclusion that Russia interfered in the presidential election. He said, we need to take steps to prevent such interference in the future. Again, what have you been doing the last 18 months? Bob Corker, Senate Foreign Relations Chairman, said the president, quote, made us look like a pushover. And that, Putin was probably eating caviar on the way home. And I guarantee he was. And sent the bill to Trump. McCain said one of the most disgraceful performances by an American president in memory. This is John McCain. Ben Sass, Republican from Nebraska. This is bizarre and flat out wrong. The Republican from Nebraska says the United States is not to blame. America wants a good relationship with the Russian people, but Vladimir Putin and his thugs are responsible for Soviet-style aggression. What I've been saying all along, they attacked us. And yet this president and up until this point, all of these people have gone, not a big deal. Tim Scott, the Republican from South Carolina. The President's Summit in Helsinki today should have been an attempt to confront Russian aggression, hacking, and election interference. Russia is not a friend or ally. As Americans, we stand up for our interests and values abroad, but I fear today was a step backward. No, today was not just a monumentous step backward. This was a number of steps backward, because don't forget, the last couple of days, we've been kicking the snot out of our allies. You got Germany going, I don't know what they're doing. And who do we look to solidify ties within the EU and Europe? And who are our allies if it's not them? Liz Cheney, the daughter of Darth Cheney. As a member of the House Armed Services Committee, she says, I am deeply troubled by President Trump's defense of Putin against the intelligence agencies of the U.S. and his suggestion of moral equivalency between the U.S. and Russia. Russia poses a grave threat to our national security. Lindsey Graham, Republican from South Carolina, said missed opportunity by the president to firmly hold Russia accountable for 2016 meddling and deliver a strong warning regarding future elections. This answer by President Trump will be seen by Russia as a sign of weakness and create far more problems than it solves. You think? And what he's talking about, and what they're all talking about, is Trump was asked directly about the meddling. Asked straightforward. And Trump's response was, my people came to me. Dan Coates came to me. Some others. They said they think it's Russia. I have President Putin. He just said it's not Russia. I'll say this. I don't have any reason why it would be. Really? No reason whatsoever? None? Now, Dan Coates, he came out with a statement saying the role of the intelligence community is to provide the best information and fact-based assessments possible for the president and policymakers. He said, we have been clear in our assessment of Russian meddling in the 2016 election and their ongoing pervasive efforts to undermine our democracy, and we will continue to provide unvarnished and objective intelligence in support of our national security. Republicans were now saying, Dan Coates should resign. No, don't do it, Dan. Look, I've never been a huge fan of the intelligence community, but right now, somebody sane and rational needs to be in there. Anybody but somebody Trump would appoint. Because think about the next person who would come in, who would be a Trump loyalist, who would kiss the ring and make the pledge. Oh yes, master. We'd never hear any of this stuff. It would all get papered over. It would all under the rug. And guess what? We would continue on this chaos course where we're tearing apart our alliances and we are cozying up with Russia. And again, I'm not against having ties with the Russian people. I'm not against trading and not against that. But you can't have the Russian military hacking into our elections. Sorry, that to me is an act of warfare. It is. There's nothing else to it. And what's frustrating is, every day something keeps coming out. And today, the big story today is that the U.S. Attorney, the Department of Justice, the U.S. Attorney's Office in D.C., they've charged a Siberian woman as part of an alleged Russian plot to infiltrate U.S. politics. This is all good 1980s spy movie kind of stuff. Federal investigators claim this woman, Maria Butina, has been operating as a covert Russian operative in the U.S. since she got to the U.S. in about 16 as full time, I guess, and that her assignment was to, quote, exploit personal connections with U.S. persons having influence in American politics in an effort to advance the interests of the Russian Federation. It's also being reported that she met with Scott Walker in Wisconsin. I evidently attended his, failed presidential campaign kickoff, and evidently she claimed that she didn't see Walker as someone being hostile towards Russia. So basically, open the spigots and money. She didn't register as a foreign agent under the Foreign Agent Registration Act. She didn't do that, and that's part of the big crime here. The U.S. Attorney's complaint claims that she sought ties with an organization promoting gun rights. Let's see, who would that be? Starts with an N, ends with an A, got an R in the middle. Oh yeah, the NRA. The gun nuts over at the NRA, who I've been saying for a long time have been in the pockets of the Russians and they're a terrorist group. Just call them what they are. They're a propaganda terrorist group. If you've ever watched that NRA TV, front and center terrorist propaganda group. But according to the affidavit, she was trying to evidently establish a back channel communications for representatives of the government of Russia. And I guess she, like I said, she met with Koch brother puppet Scott Walker. The criminal complaint states that she focused on developing personal connections with influential politicians, again, to advance the Russian interests. Who she is, 29-year-old woman, founded the group Right to Bear Arms before she showed up here in the U.S., cozied up to the NRA. And according to the Washington Post, she became an assistant to a Russian banker and former senator, this guy named Alexander Torshin, who back, I guess, in April had been sanctioned by the Treasury Department. Now, the power couple there of Torshin and Butina, him, a lifelong NRA member, her, a gun nut front group head, they, I guess, were attending NRA events since early 2014. The way it's also been reported, she attended a Trump rally and actually got to ask a question. Asked his thoughts on his views on Russia, which according to the Washington Post, he answered, we get along with Putin. So that's the response. And at the end of this is just another one of those steps. Friday, you had the 12 Russian military people indicted for their behavior and their acts. I don't know how you can stand next to Vladimir Putin today. I have no idea how you can stand next to him and say, there's no there. I don't know how you can stand next to a murderous dictator and commit a treasonous act of putting us on the same plane with him. I'm confused. And one of the other questions I'm going to ask later on in the program, we're going to have an Army veteran on and ask his thoughts on, you've got our president, the commander-in-chief of the U.S. military, standing next to an authoritarian dictator, a murderous thug who there's no way, shape, or form that the Russian assets that attacked our soldiers in Syria back in February were not at his command. There's no way that happened without his knowledge, without him pushing that forward to see just how far he could push the envelope. And look, there are a bunch of people, I've gotten a bunch of response today from people going, well, Obama. Yeah, Obama, with a Republican Congress who refused to do anything. I'm so tired of but Obama. Had Obama done anything in 2016 to alert anyone about what was going on, the right-wing echo chamber would have blown up and lost its mind. And Hillary's campaign would have been in chaos. There was no way forward. And, oh, by the way, Hillary did try to tell everybody. It's just our media, being the lapdogs that they are, just said, oh, well, she just doesn't want to show her emails. Crazy, crazy stuff. I'm going to continue on to this. I'm going to take a quick break. When we come back, Andrea Chalupa is going to be here. I'll talk about her new podcast, which is really, if you didn't know anything about 2016, you have to listen to. It really is the primer for all of this, and also share some thoughts on today's events Quick break. Right back. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show.
Own 90% of the wealth. 10% of the people. Own 90% of the wealth. Where do you fit in? Take a look at yourself. 10% of the people. Own 90% of the wealth.
Where smart policy and sound investment matters. The Rick Smith Show.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1934. That was the day fatalities on Bloody Thursday touched off a 4-day general strike in San Francisco. It was the first time a general strike had shut down a major U.S. port city. The strike had been raging since May. Workers battled with police days earlier as the shipping bosses tried to force open the docks that saw 2 workers killed. More than 40,000 poured into Market Street to march silently in their funeral procession. Outrage fueled plans for a general strike. 21 unions across the city voted to walk. In his book, Strike, Jeremy Brecker notes the momentum for a general strike was unstoppable, despite attempts by AFL leaders to prevent it. By 8 a.m. on this day, the San Francisco general strike had begun. Over 150,000 workers, including Teamsters and butchers, restaurant and transit workers, joined longshoremen and seafarers in shutting down the ports, the city, and the highways. But as Brecker points out, the strike was met with a powerful counterattack. Hundreds of special deputies were sworn in. The National Guard was called out, complete with infantry, machine guns, tanks, and artillery units. State officials were poised on the edge of declaring martial law. Vigilante raids began on the 17th with assaults on the Marine Workers Industrial Union and the offices of the Western Worker newspaper and strike bulletin. Many other gathering places and homes where workers regularly met were also busted up. Hundreds were rounded up, beaten, and arrested. The city's Central Labor Committee authorized exceptions that eroded the strike's power. In the face of the violent raids and opposition from AFL leaders, the General Strike Committee voted to end the strike. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show.
All I can do is ask the question. My people came to me, Dan Coates came to me, and some others. They said they think it's Russia. I have President Putin. He just said it's not Russia. I will say this. I don't see any reason why it would be, but I really do want to see the server. But I have confidence in both parties.
Oh, yes. Shame. Shame on you. Yeah, how do you do that? How do you do that? I mean, this is a remarkable day in that you've got even Republicans going, it was a disgrace what we saw today. And here to share some thoughts on the bromance in Helsinki, I've asked our good friend Andrea Chalupa to come talk with us. Andrea, thanks for taking time for us.
Thank you for having me, Rick.
So are we surprised?
No, not at all. Not at all. I mean, this is what we've been screaming about for years. I think you're hearing like people like, Sarah Kensier, myself, and others who've been very outspoken about this are now really throwing a big fat "we told you so" in people's faces. And that's definitely not gloating, like, at all. It's just the reality that, the veil is closing, the wall is going down. Like, what's going to happen now is just, a classic model. There's nothing innovative about any of this. It's just corruption, pure and simple. And it's just going to be an acceleration of what got us into this in the first place. You're going to see a lot of this, like dirty, secret Russian money, golden handcuffs, which reporting has pointed out has gone widely across the GOP among Republicans in the last election, and you're going to see more of that. I think it's going to most definitely penetrate the other party, the Democrats, and you're going to have a lot. It's like a huge, like the Trump White House is a huge welcome mat for Russian money, Russian influence, Russian government influence flooding America now. And if you wonder why the UK isn't doing more against the fact that they just lost one of their, citizens to a Russian nerve agent. It's simple. It's because dirty Russian money helps prop up a lot of institutions in London. They call it Londongrad for a reason.
Yep.
So that's what's going to happen here.
No, and it's interesting you brought that up, because I remember being, in Cleveland, and you heard about some Russian stuff going on. But when I got to Philadelphia for the DNC, I was asking people those questions. People that I've known for a while, going, what do you think of this? And what are you hearing? And they were saying, well, we don't want to get into that because there's Democrats doing it too. It's gotten so pervasive that it's almost everybody. And I go, it can't be that bad, can it? And now looking back on it, yeah, it is.
No, it's extremely terrifying because a Ukrainian investigative journalist put it perfectly. She said, Americans do not know what they're up against. So it's a simple formula of the golden handcuffs, which gets spread around, which locks in our elected officials. And I think that's why Republicans can, release statements, post tweets condemning Trump's horrific actions, the things he says in tweets. But the reason why they don't do anything is because probably some of these guys are in power thanks to the Russian hacking in the election. Some of these guys are probably in power thanks to dirty Russian money. Some of these Republicans, especially in the Senate, you have Senator Johnson, who won a surprise election in Wisconsin in 2016. He was part of that shocking delegation that went to Russia, the delegation of Republicans that were in Russia for our Independence Day. Like, what kind of optics is that? That they would, given everything that's happening, given that it's the facts are on our side, that Russia's a hostile regime, that Putin belongs in The Hague, not Helsinki, and so you have Senator Johnson, who's there in Moscow, who had that surprise election in Wisconsin, and he's coming back saying that the election interference by Russia is overblown. We should drop the investigation, et cetera, et cetera. Well, what are these guys doing over there? Are they ensuring that they're getting Russia support, Putin support to win in the midterms this November? I mean, they're just going to do it again.
Yep.
That's the thing. That's the thing about Russian tactics. They're brazen. They're so brazen that people think, oh no, that's too obvious. No, but that's how they do things. They've, just look at their social media bot campaign. These are like broken English bots with American flags and like Christian as the bio, like that have been attacking us for years and like sowing discord and spreading false information.
Yep.
It's so obvious. It's ridiculous. And people fall for it because they think it's just too obvious. And so it's just going to be the same playbook. There's zero innovation. It's just pure, just brazenness. That's all this is that we're up against.
And they're all grandmothers who love their country.
Right. They're all from Ohio.
Yeah, but here's the thing. I mean, Paul Ryan today said that there's no question that Russia interfered on an election. And I go, okay, you're saying that.
Yeah, he's retiring.
Yeah, but you're saying that, but what the hell have you done the last 18 months?
Nothing. And he even said in that private conversation that was caught with they were like Paul Ryan was caught discussing that Trump is Putin's boy. He was caught discussing that another GOP leader was saying, I think Putin pays Trump. And Paul Ryan's like, we don't talk about that. It's like it's all of them. It's not just Trump. The reason why all of us are screaming with our hair on fire saying, Republicans, you have all the power right now in the federal government. Why aren't you doing anything? It's because these guys were probably many of them were put in power by the same means that Trump was put into power, which is this dirty Russian money and the election hacking and the stolen data. And then, of course, there's probably the compromise of the emails and other data that was stolen from the RNC in 2016 by Russian hackers, all of it. So there's enough there for all of us to start screaming and look and calling on greater attention, greater pressure on individual members, Republican members in the Senate and the House who are likely in power because of by what Russia did. And we're not making enough noise about that. We simply aren't. I mean, these are the same guys that are trying to shut down Mueller, that are trying to impeach Rod Rosenstein.
No, I mean, we
have to start asking these questions.
No, absolutely, and which is why I think your new podcast is so timely and so necessary now that, maybe now Republicans are going to, now that the Republican Party is, I listed a whole bunch of them in the last segment of Republicans who came out and said that, the Russians did this. Maybe now people are going to go back and take a look at 2016, which is why I think your podcast Gaslit Nation is so important. And I listened over the weekend, and it took me back to those days and all of the names and all of the, the things that our media was kind of reporting, but kind of not.
Yeah, no, it's been, I'm furious at the media. I think everyone should be furious at the media. I mean, it was just the way they just beat that dead horse with Hillary's emails. I mean, and the entire time they were just laughing off and dismissing the Russia connection as being just a bad spy novel. And they're completely complicit in this. And you see people even today, like Philip Bump in the Washington Post, he's in charge of covering politics for the Post, and you see him on TV just shrugging off, that there's not enough there between Trump and Russia. It all seems so far-fetched. Why would they be doing all this out in the open? Because they're dumb criminals, Philip Bump. They're corrupt. These are people that, Trump has multiple reported links to the Russian mafia. He's been, there's money laundering investigations going on around him and his family. And that's how business is done inside Putin's Russia. That is what they know and breathe. It's corruption. It's like Americans need to stop, especially Americans who are suddenly tasked with covering Trump and Putin, need to stop acting like this is like another generation, like the 1950s, a generation of innocence, and really recognize what they're up against. And it's just bizarre to me just how it's like, let me just give you an example. This is an example of how Putin is playing chess and the American media is playing goddamn checkers. So in February of 2017, Putin's chief propagandist at Rossiya 1, the Russian state news channel, one of the leading ones, he ran a TV segment blaming my sister for orchestrating the Trump-Putin scandal and then wrote me in as her accomplice. Okay? Now, that's significant because that came on the heels of the Steele dossier finally being published. And so this was sort of the Russians' tactic of trying to distract from the Steele dossier. And then this segment was echoed by Fox News. Fox News ran an article blaming my sister for creating the Russiagate scandal, et cetera. And then Hannity really went after her. So I point that out because Putin's propagandists can tell the difference between me and my sister. We're two very separate individuals. Meanwhile, you have reporters at Pulitzer Prize-winning newsrooms here in the U.S., the land of the free press, right? And they're calling up me, they're calling up my sister, and they want to talk to us to help, connect the dots, put these pieces together, find out who they should be talking to, what they should be looking at. These reporters they don't know if they're talking to me or talking to her half the time. They think we're the same person. They cannot tell us apart. So that is my anecdote of, the fact that I just don't think the American media yet still is ready to serve the American public during this incredible time that we're in, where hyper capitalism, kleptocracy is just taking hold, and a new Iron Curtain is dropping. And I really think America is on the verge of being lost. I really do. And I think our media is very complicit in this, and our media is unfortunately not. Many leading voices in the media that are covering this don't have the sense to be doing it. They're just it's like they don't have the job background to be doing this. They simply don't.
Yeah. Or do you think it's, as I've been saying for a very long time, we have a corporate controlled media? I mean, it is what it is. They've been starving newsrooms. They've been starving investigative journalism. They've been feeding us, the Runaway Bride, or, just absolute nonsense day and night. In fact, during your podcast, you talked about Glenn Thrush, which, I remember the story about how Trump and Manafort met. And it was very bizarre how you laid it out, that it was, I guess, Trump and Thrush claims it was just a chance meeting in an elevator. Right. Yeah, exactly. They just yeah. Yet they lived in the same building for more than a decade. They were both in the same, kind of political circles. Friends, yeah. They hung out with Roger Stone and Roy Cohn. They were part of the same social circle for decades. The same year that Manafort took a $10 million a year contract from Deripaska, an oligarch very close to Putin, that same year in 2006, he bought his apartment inside Trump Tower. And so what do you think you're going to do when you're on the hook
to Putin's government, to advance the interests of Putin's government inside the U.S. Inside U.S. media and businesses. You know, he invested in a Trump property so he could have access to Trump and his world, his, you know, that social circle, even though he's already, you know, friends with him. But by buying that apartment, it's sort of like, okay, Trump, you owe me now. Like, let's see what we can do here. Like, that's very likely what happened. You know, these guys are of the mafia class. You know, there's all this back scratching going on. There's this mafia loyalty. That's why Mueller's having such a hard time breaking Manafort. That's why they've had to throw Manafort in jail. This guy's defiant. Manafort's an OG. He's going to go down shooting out. So that's, you know, all journalists covering Trump and Russia, they have to have guts right now. They have to start studying authoritarian regimes. They have to start studying Soviet history. They have to start studying, you know, Putin. Yes, Putin was the head of the, you know, yes, we can say FSB because it's the FSB now, but it's more appropriate to say KGB because he romanticized the Soviet period. He resurrected Joseph Stalin. So so if you're covering Trump and Russia today, if you're covering Russiagate, if you're covering the Trump regime today, you have to cover your bases.
Right.
Mafia, organized crime, money laundering, Soviet history, Stalin, all of it is intertwined.
That's a lot of work, though, and from a reader's standpoint, that's a lot. It's a lot easier just to. It's a witch hunt. It's a lot easier to believe witch hunt than everything you've just laid out.
Then you're going to have a mainstream media that continues to, you know, like you're going to have these pundits like Philip Bump on TV continue to sound like naive, like Leave It to Beaver little boys going, gee, gosh, I don't see how that makes sense because they sound so naive. They just sound completely out of their depth.
You know, one of the things that you had talked about in your podcast, that you were talking about your sister and the kind of intimidation tactics that were going on. Do you think that, you know, it's not that our media is naive? Do you think they don't want to put up with what your sister went through and what others go through? Because, as you said, it's going to take a lot of courage to go through this.
I think the story is just so big that people don't want to believe it and what it means. What it essentially means is that this is going to be an accelerating infiltration of the United States government at the highest level, and that spreads down to American businesses at the highest level, and so forth. And once they get in, the process starts speeding up, and the influence starts deepening, and the country itself starts to change over time. And what you're going to experience in America, if this continues under Trump, if Trump gets in, if he steals another election for president, and he's in there for another 4 years, you're going to experience a brain drain in America. You're already seeing a big decline in foreign investment. That's the early signal sign of a brain drain coming. And so then you have America, you know, essentially just it's not going to be the America we recognize anymore. It's just simply not. So I think journalists, you know, not wanting to put their lives on the line, I think that's definitely, you know, what you asked me, I think that's definitely part of it. You can't be intimidated because that's what they want. They want you to be scared. And I have to tell you, that could be the next phase of things because you have these Republican leaders who went to Russia on the 4th of July. You have Trump meeting in a closed room with Putin. What do you think the Russians are saying to these eager Republicans? They're probably telling them, like, you know, tips, even like subtly, indirectly, whatever. But there's probably a lot of, like, you know, wink and nodding. I mean, Trump himself winked at Putin in the press conference. There's probably wink and nodding of what these Republicans should be doing, and reassurance is given to them that they're going to be able to, like, stay a one-party rule because that benefits both sides. And so I think people need to be prepared for the fact that with a frustrated electorate, you're going to have more and more protests. And I personally think it's just a matter of time. You know, this is a playbook that's very familiar. This is like a Ukrainianization of American politics. And what tends to happen in these situations, you have American journalists, you know, either mysteriously or blatantly being murdered, you know, like an obvious hit, like a car bomb going off. You know, you have American opposition leaders, the same thing, you know, being gunned down. So I think the next wave of this, what you might see would be, you know, state terror. We're already seeing state terror with children being kidnapped, babies being forced to stand trials. You know, with Stephen Miller's racist, Nazi-like immigration policy that's created essentially, you know, concentration camps in American soil. So I think that is itself is a form of terror. But I think you're going to start seeing more mainstream Americans being targeted by this because, Putin doesn't bring back the 1930s by locking everybody up like Stalin did in the purges. He arrests a handful of people. He shoots down a popular opposition leader. He kills a couple of journalists, and those handful of victims are enough to instill terror in the larger population and instill control. So you don't need to kill a lot of people, just one or two, to send a strong enough message. So people start second guessing and backing down and say, look, I have a family to feed. That's not for me. I'm not going to go to that march today. I'm not going to be politically visible, et cetera, et cetera. So I think the next phase of all this will be more terror tactics, intimidation for the opposition. And I want to tell people that the anecdote to that is, the Ukrainian anecdote, which is just keep showing up. Just keep showing up. The revolution in Ukraine was successful because anytime there were these viral photos of activists that were kidnapped and tortured, that just drove more people out into the street. More and more people kept coming. And it was just a flood of people. They just couldn't stop. And so anytime, you have anything terrorizing like that the state does, whether it's the kidnapped babies or an or political assassination, do not despair. Show up and work harder and bring all your friends and like just stand up and get everybody to come out with you, because that is the anecdote. That's how you topple them. That's how you overcome this. I really believe that Americans were dealing with severe PTSD after the assassination of Kennedy, after the assassination of his brother, after the assassination of Martin Luther King. And I think that really paralyzed the progressive movement in America. I think that was a deep trauma that we didn't confront and heal from, and we can't repeat that mistake again. So if anything happens again, if anything happens for me, for instance, you all better freaking take to the streets and like avenge my death by like cleaning up the election system and making it, hack proof, and just fight harder, fight smarter, and join together, and don't turn on each other, trust each other, and just really fight for your lives. Because if America falls, if America becomes some Trumpian Putin regime that's aggressive on the world stage as it already is now, if it becomes worse and worse and worse and falls into deeper decline, it's going to become a greater threat, and there's nowhere in the world you could hide then.
Yeah, I want to highlight what you just said, because 2018, we don't think like that anymore. That that it's possible that because of your knowledge, because of your voice, because of you speaking out, that the reality is that someone could do you in.
Yeah, that's the reality you live with. People, there's Sarah and I have to decide on that podcast what we want to tell people, whether we're ready to tell them this or we're ready to tell them that. And there's a lot of stuff that we just simply don't include because it is disturbing. People don't like to talk about it. People don't like to think about it. And it's just, we're at war right now. And it's like, even saying that sounds crazy, but it's like the fact that I have to even preface that with a little like side joke. Oh, that sounds crazy. I know, but that's the reality of it. That's what they're doing to us. I don't know. It is very upsetting. And it hits you on a personal level because I work in human rights with Russians and Ukrainians. I helped a friend from Moscow who had escaped in 2012 when there were Russians in the street protesting Putin's re-election. And I helped him get asylum. And he had threats in Russia against his family, against his daughter, for his political activism. And I can't even imagine what he's thinking, psychologically being here, thinking that he escaped that and it's come here. And he's telling me things about people that he thought he trusted in Russian circles who have now crossed over to the other side. And so it's just like a really difficult space to work in because it really does, it can demoralize you if you let it. But what really sort of props you up are, the people whose expertise you really trust, who have the experience. That's why, doing this podcast with Sarah Kendzior is saving my life right now. Sarah and I talk on the phone regularly. That's, we podcast on the phone. We've been podcasting, just the two of us, for, since Trump won, since 3 a.m. on election night. And we finally decided to, do a formal podcast and let people in because we were saving each other's lives doing this together.
No, and look, I listened to the first episode and informative, powerful, insightful. You talk about at one point about, how, in 2016, you were trying to get people to look at what was going on in Ukraine and look at all of the Crimea and all of that. And, someone told you, well, Americans don't care about Ukraine. And I would argue still don't, but really should.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, Ukraine, I'm sure, sees the writing on the wall of what's happening. They saw that press conference. They see that, Trump called Ukraine corrupt, basically saying, like, let's give up on Ukraine, it's corrupt. He's had favorable remarks towards Crimea that it's Russian. Even in the press conference, Putin today was saying that, Russia, this is like brilliant. This just is like, one of the greatest exports of Putin's Russia is trolling. And this is just world-class trolling by Vladimir Putin at the press conference with Trump. He said, Russia held a election in Crimea that was done according to international standards. Let that sink in for a moment. A foreign country holds an election on your soil that they've just invaded you. Could you imagine that? Like, I mean, they could say the same thing about the 2016 election oh my gosh, but Ukraine matters because Ukraine, including Ukraine's journalists, they have clear eyes about Putin and Russia, and therefore they're able to stop the hacking of their own election. They're not naive.
Right. And well, I mean, it was the testing ground.
Yes, exactly. And so they've been incredibly good with stopping Russia. Putin went into invading Ukraine saying that he was going to carve up substantially more of it. He was going to create what he called Novorossiya, which is, he was going to grab an area of land that was part of the Russian Empire under Catherine the Great. So he was going to rip off a big fat chunk of Ukraine. And he didn't, because Ukrainians stopped him, because they know how. And that's why we need Ukraine to stay free. We need to all care about Ukraine, because Ukraine is on the front lines in protecting a free Europe and protecting a free United States. They're there. We need to learn from them. We need to understand like how they're able to spot this, the different tactics, and whatever happens there tends to come over to the U.S. So Ukraine's security is in America's best interest.
So how do we do that? I mean, because look, anytime I bring up the Russian involvement in the election, the first thing I get is, well, Hillary stole the election. And I would argue that, the Bernie bots are turning almost into the Paul bots, with they're just blind. We were right and everybody else is wrong, and we're never changing our minds. I'm struggling with, how you reach those people who, cannot see that anything that Russia did had anything with the election, because it was all Hillary.
I think what's sickening about today is that a lot of those people are finally waking up from what they've seen today. And one woman even said, today to me, like, I fell for it, and so I think you have to just ignore those people and just keep shouting and raising your voice, and the others who see it too will come find you, and your voices will be strengthened together, and eventually you'll make enough noise that it'll create a turning point. So you can't wait for the idiots to catch up. That's not your problem. Just ignore them and keep focusing on the facts, keep focusing on the work at hand. It's like I love my country. I love my country. My parents have a very proud history of, being born in refugee camps and being welcomed here as immigrants. My mother saw the Statue of Liberty when she was a 5-year-old girl coming into New York Harbor. My father landed at Boston Harbor, and he was given like a good humor ice cream bar as soon as he landed by a complete stranger on the street who stopped to buy this little kid an ice cream bar. And, they achieved the American dream. So I madly love my country. And so for me, it's like, I feel like I'm fighting my heart out to warn people about Trump and Russia. I've been doing it for years. And the entire time I was like getting called crazy and getting hit pieces written about me by left and right. And it's just like, and I just kept doing it because I had my blinders on, because I knew why I was doing it.
No, I mean, like every time for the first year, all of 2017, whenever we had you on, and Sarah and a couple other people that I have on fairly often, I would get the emails from people going, oh, they're all, they're lunatics, or, they're fringe, or, they're just Hillary people, or whatever. And I'm going,
right.
No, I'm not buying all of that. And I want to get to the bottom of this Russia thing. I grew up believing that the Russians were the enemy, and I still believe that they are. Not the people, but the leadership and the people like Putin and all of those people who want to get the old gang back together.
Yeah, I mean, Putin ultimately wants the breakup of the United States, and I think there was was it a French philosopher, I believe, that predicted that the USSR would fall apart, and then a couple decades later, the U.S. would break apart as well. And if you look at our country's history, we're just so diverse that you almost have to wonder if we're better off as like an EU of separate states. Especially like why should I have Mitch McConnell? I'm from California. I'm a native of California. Why should I have Mitch McConnell in the Senate of Kentucky? Like deciding, taking a huge part, including censoring the from the public what was going on in Trump and Russia during the election, keeping that away from the public. Why should I have him deciding the fate of my country? I don't relate to that guy whatsoever. I'm a progressive. I'm from a deeply blue state. And I think Americans feel held hostage by the far right. And what if that frustration continues to grow? If you keep having these mysterious elections that go completely against the poll numbers, especially in areas that are vulnerable to hacking, if what happens is that it's so obvious that our elections are broken and stolen, then I think what you might suddenly see are independence referendums sprout up in places like California. The Russians are already trying to fan that flame. So what I'm saying is I think progressives are going to get to a breaking point with the far right in this country, and you're going to have the Russian bots streaming in and fanning those flames, and you might see referendums, you might see some other threats to break up the United States. I'm not saying anytime soon, but that could, if this trend continues, if we feel like democracy is lost, if these elections keep getting stolen, I mean, that could be the end game here. And that's certainly well known that that's what Putin wants. He wants to see the breakup of the U.S. He made remarks that were something along the lines of, one of the greatest tragedies was the breakup of the Soviet Union. So all of his whole agenda has been to restore the glory of the Russian Empire, and he's done that in such an incredible way. So if you love underdog stories, Putin is an excellent underdog story. Really, he will be studied for centuries.
Oh, yeah.
And so, but he's done it with such utter. It's been utter madness. What he's done, treating mass murderer Stalin, who's on par with Adolf Hitler, putting up, doing this whole Stalin renaissance inside Russia, where there's statues going up to Stalin, where you have a historian on Stalin's Great Terror who's being harassed by the Russian state, and they're putting him in prison for trumped-up pedophilia charges, and he's just a historian on Stalin's Great Terror. That's what's going on now. That's just one of many examples of Putin's success story. I mean, it's a vile success story, but it is one of tremendous achievement.
No, I mean the PR game around him was masterful.
Right.
The guy on the horse without a shirt on, and the Volkswagen, and Bush with I saw in his soul. They really made him into basically a Republican.
Yeah, no, definitely. And one of your guests who's really wonderful, Christopher Stroop, who's an expert on evangelicals, he made a really great point to me and Sarah once. He was saying that when the Reagan Republicans were fighting the evil Soviet Empire, it was an atheist empire. And then when the wall fell and the Republicans flooded, the Western capitalists flooded the Soviet Union flooded Moscow and trying to remake Russia into a Western image. What you had was suddenly this marriage between the Christian right in the West and the Russian Orthodox Church, which is connected to the government. So now, Putin has crafted this whole savior of Russia, deeply embedded with the Russian Orthodox Church, which has a long history with the KGB inside Russia and the FSB, and so they're really using this, evangelical kind of what the far right in America does with the evangelicals. Putin has that going on with the Orthodox Church inside Russia, and so that's another thing that really bridges Republicans and Putinism together. Is this this mask of religious fundamentalism.
And again, Chris has told me that as well, and it's masterful what they've done. Last question I wanted to get your thoughts on. Today, the big story breaking that this Maria Butina, evidently the the founder of the Right to Bear Arms, I guess a Russian gun nut group. Her arrest. Thoughts on that? Big deal, yes or no?
Huge, absolutely. I mean, it's like, you follow the money, and there was money coming from the NRA to these Republican campaigns in 2016. Again, this is all part of the larger story. We have to focus on why Republicans are backing or saying one thing, but then supporting Trump with their votes, or trying to end the Mueller investigation. It's because it's like groups like the NRA. The NRA was in trouble. There's only so long that your products can go, killing innocent kindergartners. Sandy Hook was one of the greatest, most shameful chapters in American history. What happened to Sandy Hook, just as one of many examples. So, I think what's happened is, the NRA saw the writing on the wall, and they joined this coalition in 2016 to ensure victory of their candidate, and they were deeply involved in this as this terror organization. I think this is just the beginning, and people have to understand that about a year ago they were laughing about, oh, who cares about the Russians buying Facebook ads or creating fake websites. They thought that's Russia really got Trump elected by having some bots. No, it's we're still out of phase, even at this point, even with all the bombshells we've had about the 12 indictments of the Russians hacking the DNC, the 12 indictments of the intel officers, even the latest of this conduit, this Russian spy who was moving between, NRA interests and being a link between Putin's government and the Republicans, through the gun lobby. All of this is still very much scratching the surface. There's still a lot that is going to be uncovered, and what you're going to see is it's going to be I think the eye on the prize that everyone needs to have is uncovering all the golden handcuffs, who specifically inside Congress, on the House side, on the Senate side, which Republicans specifically benefited from Russian money. I know that's been reported, but really understanding how they broke the law in those cases, and how they benefited from stolen data. What do they know and when did they know it, et cetera. And sort of, I think you're going to see Americans definitely get swept up in this. And I think the answer to why won't Republicans do anything to stop Trump, it's because of they benefited from the 2016 Russian hacks as much as he did. And they're part of the crime.
It's in depth. It's a lot to take in. It's a lot to understand. But you guys do a great job on your podcast. I hope everyone will take a look at it. Gaslit Nation. We'll make sure we get links out so people can listen and get caught up. Because as you've said, I think now maybe people will start to wake up a little bit and maybe take it a little bit more seriously of just how in trouble we are as a nation. Andrea, I appreciate the time, the thoughts. Great work. I'd love to have you come back again real soon.
Thank you for having faith in us, Rick, and giving us this platform all these years. And you were one of the first, and we appreciate it. I appreciate it. Thank you so much, Andrea. Good stuff. Take care. Seriously, I mean, I don't know how she does it, but I give her credit for doing it. Good on her. Let's take a quick break. Right back. Stick around.
Shame on you for doing me like you do. You saw me yesterday. You turned your head and walked away.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. This day in labor history, the year was 1862. That was the day that black rights activist Ida B. Wells Barnett was born in Holly Springs, Mississippi. She was the oldest of 8 children. Wells went to college and then became a teacher in Memphis, Tennessee. While in Memphis, Ida B. Wells became active in speaking out against black oppression in the Jim Crow South. She was the editor of a black newspaper, the Free Speech and Headlight. She wrote about many of the issues that faced the black community, including violence, unequal education facilities, and voter suppression. Taking such a public stand could have disastrous repercussions. She wrote under the pseudonym Iola, but she was fired from her job for writing about the inequities of the segregated Southern education system. Tom Moss, a successful black store owner and friend of Ida B. Wells, was lynched by a white mob. 2 other black men were also lynched for helping him to try and defend his store. Black Southern business owners were seen as potential economic competition and were often the targets of threats, violence, and lynching. Angered by the murders, Ida B. Wells began to research the lynchings. She published the findings of her investigation in her newspaper. Furious white residents destroyed and burned her newspaper office. In danger for her life, Wells left Memphis. Ida moved to Chicago, where she continued her anti-lynching work, documenting how the heinous act happened not only in the South. She helped to found the NAACP. At the first NAACP conference in Atlanta in 1909, Wells spoke, saying, quote, "Time was when lynching appeared to be sectional, but now it is national. A blight upon our nation, mocking our laws, and disgracing our Christianity." Like what you hear? Check out more at laborhistoryin2.com.
Waving the flag of freedom for people, not corporations. Rick Smith.
You know, I remember it was Inauguration Day, and I think we had Sarah on, we had Matthew Chapman on, we had Propane Jane will be on in the next hour. We had a couple of folks coming on talking about, you know, what we saw in 2016 and what we were going to see in 2017 and beyond. And that show got me, you know, tons of emails from people, from the angry crowd, the Trump supporters who are, you're just sour grapes and all of that. I'm going, no, there's something here that is wrong. And, you know, I remember, you know, going through it all during the 2016 election. And, you know, like I said, at the conventions, it was there. It was an undercurrent of all of that. And, you know, I got a bunch of response from the Sanders people who seemed to be the most vocal, angry, you know, that, you know, Hillary lost the election, but, you know, Bernie would have won, and maybe he would have, maybe he wouldn't have. I don't know. But I remember when Sanders was playing the maybe I'm in, maybe I'm not game. And a friend, you know, said, you know, what are your thoughts? And I laid it out to him. I said, you know, basically, look, Sanders has got a great message. People are going to love his message. They're going to flock to him. And, you know, basically, you know, they're going to love about him what I did. I've been following him for 15 years before. He was the first person I ever interviewed for this program, you know, back in 2005. You know, so I was on the Bernie bandwagon. I was a Bernie guy before there were Bernie people. And I said, he's not going to win because, you know, Hillary learned from her loss to Obama how the game works. The super delegates are the game, and she's already began wrapping them up. And it was not a secret. This isn't all insider baseball. This is how the game was played. And you have to know the rules of the game. And this is my problem with people, you know, the Johnny-come-latelys who, when you know, now I know something because I went to a meeting. The game is played the way the game is played. You want to change the rules? I'm all in favor of that. Let's do that. But she played by the rules. And also in the states where they voted, she got the majority of the votes. He won caucus states. He won some other states. And, you know, at the end of those votes were still counted. Now we can have an argument of, you know, should we have southern states first as Democrats? And I would argue no. This way you end up with a more progressive candidate. But it was what it was. At some point, I want my Bernie people to come back and say, you know what? Okay, 2016 was what it was. You know, if we want Bernie in 2020, work your behinds off to get Bernie elected in 2020. But stop this nonsense, ending up like the Ron Paul people. Please stop, just assaulting me with nonsensical messages of, well, you know, Bernie would have won. Okay, maybe he would have. But we're here now. The fight is now going forward. The fight is Trump. The fight is not 2016. It's not Hillary. It's not Bernie. It's not back then. It's going forward. And I know this is, you know, I'm just so tired of the Bernie bots who just don't want to let go. Fix what we need to fix. Move forward. Let's get somebody elected in 2018 and then take the White House back in 2020 and fix this stuff. But don't allow ourselves to be divided and torn apart. That's not helpful. Just my thought. I'd love to hear yours. You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Quick break. Right back with our good friend Propane Jane. Stick around.
Controversial, thought-provoking, opinionated. Rick Smith.
We Americans believe that everyone has a right to their day in court, right? But what if the court is turned into a loony bin, making a mockery of justice? Welcome to the federal immigration courts that are struggling to deal with the insanity of Trump's imperious zero-tolerance decree that all Latino asylum seekers will be jailed and prosecuted as criminals. How insane is it? Toddlers, separated from their parents by Trump's border guards, are being put on trial for entering the U.S. illegally. We were representing a 3-year-old in court, said a dismayed defender of a migrant kiddo, and the child in the middle of the hearing started climbing up on the table. It really highlighted the absurdity of what we're doing with kids. Not just doing with them, but to them. Fleeing unimaginable trauma in their home country, then suffering the pain of being torn away from their parents inside our border. The expectation that these little ones can mount a legal defense has rightly been labeled unconscionable and grossly inappropriate by experts. But I would add, inexpertly, that it is insane and evil. Here's a bit of Trumpian evil for you. Johan, a 1-year-old Honduran boy taken from his amnesty-seeking father by border agents, was hauled into federal immigration court in July. A 1-year-old. As an AP reporter wrote, the baby briefly played with a ball, drank from a bottle, then cried hysterically. The law doesn't even require that children have a lawyer to represent them. The judge said he was too embarrassed to try explaining this judicial proceeding to anyone. I don't know who you would explain it to unless you think that a 1-year-old could learn immigration law, the judge said in exasperation. This is Jim Hightower saying, maybe he could try explaining it to the U.S. president who has foisted this lunacy on us. It's a case of the inmates having taken charge of the insane asylum.
Hightower's commentaries are brought to you by the Hightower Lowdown, the monthly newsletter with Hightower's take on what Wall Street and Washington are up to. For information, visit hightowerlowdown.org.
Making the blue blood see red. The Rick Smith Show.
Somebody's watching you.
So the question was asked, does the Russian government have any compromising material on President Trump or his family? It was the second part of the question, the question, of a question. But Putin said this, quote, and now to the compromising material. Yeah, I did hear these rumors that we allegedly collected compromising material on Mr. Trump when he was visiting Moscow. Well, distinguished colleagues, let me tell you this. When President Trump was at Moscow back then, I didn't even know he was in Moscow. I treat President Trump with utmost respect. But back then, he was a private individual, a businessman. Nobody informed me that he was in Moscow. Do you know what he didn't say there? He didn't say no. I'm not wrong. He did not say. In fact, Trump didn't say no either. So it's one of those kind of interesting moments where nobody said no. So you got to wonder, are the shower tapes legit? Will we know? I don't know. Let's find out what's going on and talk with our good friend Propane Jane. Jane, thanks for taking time for us.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me back.
So they didn't just say no.
I think that's very interesting indeed. And I do think that what Putin is saying is actually pretty straight up in the sense that he's KGB. I mean, he's known for collecting information about people and surveilling people. And so somebody as high profile as Trump, particularly who is, for years, decades even, been in and out of Russia, begging for money, trying to sell them things, trying to get them to help him out of debt. They know when he's there and what he's doing and what he's asking for. And so I think, even though it's not something that has been explicitly confirmed in terms of the P tapes or whatever you want to call it, I mean, I think it's not hard to to believe or see that a businessman comes into town with his entourage, and they supply various women for their pleasure while they're there. And Trump has already made it very clear that he's the type of person that would engage in something like that. And so I think Putin is, it's a non-denial for a reason. I think the likelihood that if he was there, that they would have gotten any sort of information about what he was doing behind closed doors is very high, because why not? Look how you can use it against him and use it against the whole country at this point.
No, and it's scary. Now you look at today, you could call it the Treason Summit, or the Surrender Summit, or the Helsinki humiliation, or whatever you want to, however you want to throw that out there. As I was watching it happen, I couldn't help but think, about our conversations over the last couple of years. As I'm going, is it even possible for him to comprehend that it's even remotely possible that the Russians interfered? Would his ego allow? Because I think this is all about his ego. This is all about diminishing the one accomplishment that he throws out every single time, and that's he beat that woman.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think he wants to, I think after the election he told on himself in many ways, because he was so focused on the electoral college vote and that electoral college map. And in a lot of ways, his focusing on that, I think, shows that that's like a prized possession for him. I mean, he feels like he won it, and I don't think it really matters to him the means by which he won. I don't think that he's incapable of recognizing that he participated in a conspiracy to get ahead. I just think that the world that he's always lived in is nothing but constant conspiracy and corruption and privilege and graft. I mean, this is the world that he comes from. And so for that element of the world, it doesn't matter what steps you took to get there and to win. The only thing that matters to them is that they won.
Yeah, I guess I can see that. Now, there's part of me, and I've been saying this since the beginning, that, I don't know that he was directly, consciously wanting to collude with the Russians. I believe that he's been elbow to elbow with the oligarchs, and it's just how business gets done in his world. But I look at this and I look at what happened today, and I'm reconsidering everything I've ever believed based on how do you do what he did today?
Well, I mean, you do it when you are thinking of yourself first and foremost. I mean, Donald Trump went into those quote unquote negotiations, or whatever it was. I mean, it was basically just them on a date. I mean, with no one else there. It wasn't something that I think was even meant to be this, what everybody kind of thought it was going to be going into this. Like, he's going to go in there and he needs to, demand accountability for these 12 indictments. And, there's people sort of wanting him to become presidential, still engaging in this magical thinking, when ultimately, this time last year when he went and met behind closed doors with Putin, we had the whole Syria attacks that had just happened. I mean, he had plenty of reasons to be tough on him then, and he wasn't. So this is a pattern of behavior that he's engaged in ever since he was sworn in, and obviously even before he was actually inaugurated. But I think that ultimately, Putin has this power over him because ultimately Trump feels like he has to please him to keep things, in a favorable light for himself. And I think he really is going in there thinking that he can somehow, prove everybody wrong, and he can be the one that negotiates with North Korea and negotiates with Russia and does all of these really unprecedented things. But ultimately, it just makes him look more guilty because he's not actually being tough on someone who we know at this point has, interfered with our election. And so he just, I think, is looking more guilty because he's just trying to serve his own self-interest.
Well, a lot of people are throwing the T word around, not Trump. They're throwing the traitor word around. Do you think this rises to that level?
I think it does. I mean, I think the moment that he goes into that meeting with him and smiles at him and winks at him and takes this very submissive position. I mean, he didn't actually get on a knee, but he was genuflecting.
Or something that you would do on a knee. That's really not nice. That's probably true.
But this is the language that people are using because this is how betrayed people feel.
No, I'm right there. But my problem is Trump wants to be that tough guy. He wants to be. What is it about Putin that puts him in a submissive role? I mean, it's very strange to me.
Well, I mean, I think that's sort of the mystique of the sociopath, honestly, and even the narcissist, that they go into situations where they will try to be very charming, and they will use flattery in a lot of ways because that's what works on them. And so he's going into that situation and thinking that he can sort of butter Putin up and he's the art of the deal. And, this is just his way of kind of schmoozing people. And that really you just need to kind of, respect him and talk to him man to man. And, hey, we're both members of the Dictator Club. And I can just show you how well we get along with each other. It's very reality TV style again. It's very let me show you around my golf course style. He's not treating it like this is actual, this is you going into a conversation with somebody who is a foreign adversary. And he thinks that he's actually winning that person over. And when really Putin is actually playing him.
Yeah, I mean, because, I watched this today and, and look, I saw it all weekend long. I mean, all of the attacking our allies, you're saying stuff to the media about Theresa May and then to her face, what is that? What is that? The whole backstabbing thing. And then, we got a tremendous relationship. I mean, it's almost like this kind of bipolar situation or even schizophrenic. Look, I'm not the psychiatrist you are, but it just seems like, there's a bunch of different people operating here.
Well, again, this is what somebody who is a sociopath is capable of doing. They're capable of sort of being like water. They can fill whatever container they get filled into. They can take that shape. And so no matter what room he's in, he is sort of appearing to bend himself to what he thinks is going to win over the big dog in the room. I don't know if you have dogs. But, when there's sort of a new dog that comes up against this very dominant dog, what do? They roll over, and they sort of let them sniff them, and they're very submissive, actually, until they can kind of, they want to show deference to who looks like the top dog.
Yeah,
and
who's the alpha dog. Yeah.
Exactly. And then in that dynamic, I think Trump is very much wanting Putin to feel like he's in control. And that's why people really are concerned, I think. I mean, I think people who are across the political spectrum who really haven't been very concerned about the Russia collusion aspect, their ears are standing up because they saw how deferent he was to him. And he wasn't treating him like somebody who had actually attacked us. This would be like George W. Bush going and sitting down with Osama bin Laden and telling him he's a fine person. And he agrees with the way that he does things and winking at him.
Well, if I remember right, George W. Bush did bring him a cake, or George H.W. Bush did bring him a cake.
Well, I mean, that was his dad.
That was a different era.
Right, exactly.
But no, it's just strange to me. And it's one of these things where you just, you have to then ask the question, when does the Republican Party wake up? Because as I laid out earlier in the program, you now have all of these Republicans like Paul Ryan and down the list, Sass and a bunch of them saying, there was meddling. They meddled in the election. There's no question about it. And then, of course, Lindsey Graham throws in there's a difference between meddling and collusion. They still attacked us, regardless of how they still attacked us. Why are you doing nothing?
Well, because ultimately, Trump isn't the only beneficiary of what Russia did in the 2016 election. And this propaganda that was used, this hacked information that was used against congressional Democrats as well. And so that means that there are sitting members of Congress who are ensnared in this as well. And so the question, I think, becomes how many of them are just either, biting their tongue or actually, giving like these wholehearted endorsements of what Donald Trump is doing. How many of them are doing that because they are also compromised, or they are also someone who has a conflict of interest when it comes to this propaganda that came from Russia? And so that's the question that we don't have any answers to at this point. Again, we hardly ever talk about the fact that they also hacked the RNC.
Yeah, but we didn't get any juicy stuff out of that. That wasn't the focus of an entire election. That's for later down the road when the Republicans get out of hand.
Well, and is that what Putin is using over not just Trump but the entire Republican Party?
No, you're right. I think we completely forget that the RNC got hacked as well.
Yeah, and so what sort of information is being held over their head as an entire party? I mean, if there are various members of leadership, people who I think have changed their tune too many times to be, comfortable with, I think we really need to start digging into, okay, did you get money, from these PACs that are associated with Russia? And where do you stand in terms of your own obligations to a foreign adversary at this point? Is this why your hands are tied? And do you need to be just removed from office? Because not only because you're not doing anything, but because you've, engaged in a criminal treasonous enterprise at this point.
It's just, it's almost, so do you see a point at which even the Trump supporters look at this and go, this is too far? Is this that moment? Because, I said earlier that it's my view that, up until this moment, you could make the argument that a Trump supporter was just, just blindly ignorant or blissfully ignorant or whatever. Mm-hmm. This display today is that moment to where you're either in one of two camps now. There's no middle ground. You're either, a knuckle dragger and a mouth breather and just completely brain dead, or you're in on it. You're complicit. You're actively working to destroy the institutions that this country was built on. There's no middle ground. Or am I too black and white in this?
No, I don't think you're too black and white. I mean, I went shopping at Barnes & Noble last weekend.
They still have those?
Yeah, they do, actually. And right when you come through the entrance, they had this table in the front that said dystopian novel. And they have Fahrenheit 451. They have Handmaid's Tale. I mean, they have all of these books. All of these Orwellian books.
Those historical novels.
And I think, and I just sort of sat there for a second and just thought, man, this is the climate that we're living in. I mean, this is this is what people are interested in consuming. They're wise to put this out right now because these are the times that we're living in, and people are we don't really have answers for this. I mean, this is truly unprecedented, and I don't think anybody knows what to do. I mean, even the Republicans, not that I think they genuinely care about doing what's right and what's in the best interest of this country right now. But I think even they are just stunned and don't know what to say. That not necessarily that Trump is doing things that are questionable and corrupt and unstable, but just that he can't keep it together better than this. That there's just no mechanism for him looking less guilty. And how much harder it now becomes to stand next to him. I think even they are stunned at what he's done today.
Yeah. In fact, a Republican operative, Rick Wilson, who is not a Trump supporter, he tweeted out a picture today of George W. Bush sitting behind the desk about to give the speech, after 9/11, where with the words, well, I spoke with Osama. He says he didn't do it. And, it got me to thinking of, look, we were physically attacked. You saw the planes go into the towers, even though there are some who say that those weren't actually planes and the towers didn't actually come down or whatever the hell the argument is.
Right.
But, we saw that happen. We saw the physical destruction. I would argue that this attack, this cyber attack is just as troubling.
Yeah, it is, but I think maybe people, because of just how polarized we are politically, they're half of the country is unable to sort of just accept and acknowledge that, because that means that their choice wasn't the right choice, and it wasn't the winning choice, and it was actually a choice that was highly compromised by a cyber attack. And also by all of the other things that are there, the racism, the misogyny, the other things that they just don't own either. But I think that they really did put their hopes and their dreams in this man. And it's very hard for them to see him as anything other than, what they've inflated him to be.
Yeah. Look, I think about the average voter that I know who's a Trump supporter. There's part of me that goes, yeah, maybe I get it. But someone like John Kelly, I mean, I look at him every day, every time I see a picture of him, and I go, what exactly are you doing? You are an American hero. What are you doing still sitting next to this guy? And look, I guess on Friday, the picture that came out of him being very uncomfortable, I guess the argument is he didn't get breakfast. I don't buy it. And today the picture of him, sitting with the rest of them across the table from Putin, I'm going, what the hell are you doing there?
I mean, if he doesn't resign tomorrow, it's pretty clear, that he's just going down with the ship.
Any hope? Really, any hope?
Because I see generals, I see, people who are well-respected leaders in the intelligence community and in the military community who are just downright appalled by this. And I don't see how someone with his credentials can still stand there. I mean, we have joked about Alan Dershowitz and the people on Martha's Vineyard, ostracizing him. But for a lot of the people who, come from that like law and order military industrial complex wing of the Republican Party, I mean, this is a very interesting moment. I mean, they have a chance to not be hypocrites here. But
any chance that happens?
I don't know. I mean, at this point, everything is turned upside down.
Yeah.
You don't even really know where the national security community. I mean, obviously, you have Dan Coats that is firmly stating, yes, they did interfere with our election. This is something that we should be taking seriously. But Trump is like openly disagreeing with him. And even though Trump is by no means an expert in foreign policy or anything that has to do with like protecting our national security, there are certain people that will just take his side because, they trust him for some reason. But these very serious people, again, who are former military, veterans, these groups, this is a moment, I think, where they really have to ask themselves some very tough questions, because they raised holy hell about people kneeling during the anthem at football games. And this is a moment where this man has literally stood next to somebody who attacked us and helped him steal our election, actually. And he basically patted him on the back and gave him permission to do it again.
Or on the top of his head, either way.
Yeah.
Wow. And you're right. The kneeling thing, I forgot. I forgot to bring that up, because you've got, surrender, the Surrender Summit here, or, like I said, the Treason Summit, whichever you want to call it, that the kneeling much worse, evidently.
Yeah. The hypocrisy is just, it's rampant. There are service members who have risked their lives to collect the intelligence that they've collected on this man for years. And think how many people have lost their jobs who have in some ways gone down in disgrace. Think about James Comey, think about McCabe. They were basically ousted from their jobs, their lifelong career they had in law enforcement, because they were seeking the truth about what happened in the election.
Yeah. So let me ask you last line of questioning, because we need to bring this up. people need to be able to wake up or, go to bed without feeling that the walls are closing, or wake up feeling that, hey, the end of the world isn't coming, and, go spend every dollar on the lottery or whatever the hell people do at the end of the world. How do you deal with this? How should folks give us some of that psych talk?
Well, I mean, I think that, on the one end, avoiding this is not going to make it go away. I think it's still there. It's still something that we have to address. And this is one of those moments where we really have to be as proactive as we can be, without our whole, personal lives falling apart. But as engaged as you can be individually, be engaged, because it actually, in some of these situations where you feel helpless and you feel like there is no solution and nobody's doing anything, sometimes it can actually be self-care to do some things.
There you go.
And to take some action. So I would say call your members of Congress.
Vent. Yep, I love the venting. Go.
Yeah, do some venting. If there's a protest in your area, protest. And then, do what feels good to you in your family, in your friendships, in your social life, at work.
So I need to live my life. Okay.
Live your life. Take a break.
I need to vent, and I need to actually get a life. Okay.
And then you need to make sure you're registered to vote, and then you need to vote.
No, I'm a super voter. That's not a problem.
I mean, this is where we're at.
That's okay.
I don't think that's changed. I don't think any of that has changed. I mean, that is still our civic duty as Americans. And just because the Republicans aren't doing their job doesn't mean that, we get to stop doing ours.
There it is.
Keep going. We have to keep resisting.
As always, great stuff, Jane. I appreciate the time. Thank you so much. I feel a lot better.
Okay, good. I'm glad.
As we all should. Thanks so much.
All right. Have a great week.
You as well. Good talking with you. Look, because you can get bogged down in this. I mean, this could be, you could take this and it really drive you into despair. Andrea's been right. Propane Jane's right. We need to find each other. We need to come together. We need to stand together, shoulder to shoulder. We need to move forward and march. Lots of marching, especially on November 6th. Right to the polls to vote the bums out. That simple. Quick break. Right back. Stick around. You listen to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk.
Me and my people are through. Me and my people are ready. Me and my people are just about due. I'm a massive airstrike on a beautiful night. Yeah, it's my song I'm singing. Somebody better start counting. We're coming out. We're coming out swinging.
Not right wing, just right. The Rick Smith Show.
The Supreme Court could not only tell the EPA it no longer has to regulate carbon, but actually say the EPA doesn't have authority to regulate carbon.
Environmental groups mobilize against Trump's anti-regulation nominee to the Supreme Court. New report finds Trump's proposed coal bailout means more pollution and more death. Plus,
so electric mobility has to happen fast.
Shell CEO calls on UK to speed up transition to electric vehicles.
All of that electrifying news and more straight ahead. From BradBlog.com, I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
Stand by for 6 minutes of independent green news, politics, analysis, and snarky comment.
But now Scott Pruitt will be succeeded by Andrew Wheeler, a former coal and chemical lobbyist who was the vice president of a group called the Washington Coal Club, which is kind of like the Secretary of Health being a member of the Beltway Gonorrhea Society.
True, though gonorrhea is less deadly than coal. This is your Green News Report. Okay, Desi Doyen, a lot of folks have reason to be very concerned about Donald Trump's new nominee for the U.S. Supreme Court. And environmentalists, I would think, top the list given the damage this guy could do to the entire planet.
Yes. Major environmental groups say they are now mobilizing a public pressure campaign to oppose the confirmation of Donald Trump's pick of D.C. Court of Appeals Judge Brett Kavanaugh for a lifetime appointment on the U.S. Supreme Court to replace retiring Justice Anthony Kennedy. Citing Kavanaugh's track record of ruling for industry and against federal pollution regulations, the Sierra Club, in a statement, called Kavanaugh, quote, an extreme ideologue who has time and again proven himself hostile to common sense environmental safeguards. Kavanaugh's views put the demands of polluters and big corporations before the rights of people. Retiring Justice Kennedy was occasionally a swing vote for public health and the environment, but with Kavanaugh, the court's right-wing majority could achieve long-sought overhauls of established public health protections like the Clean Air Act and the Clean Water Act. On a recent broadcast, Slate legal journalist Mark Joseph Stern noted that a number of significant Obama-era climate policy and pollution lawsuits are on their way to the court, which could rule to cripple the federal government's ability to curb the greenhouse gases that cause dangerous global warming.
There is a very, very strong chance that with Justice Kavanaugh's vote in the near future, the Supreme Court could not only tell the EPA it no longer has to regulate carbon, but actually say the EPA doesn't have authority to regulate carbon. This is what Justice Samuel Alito said in a speech a few years back, and I don't think the conservatives have given up this fight.
Now, scientists warn that the window of opportunity is closing to cut emissions and stave off the worst climate consequences that will impact all generations on the planet. So if he is seated, his impact will be very long-lasting.
And potentially very deadly.
Meanwhile, the Trump administration Department of Energy's proposal to force taxpayers to bail out unprofitable coal and nuclear power plants could actually lead to more deaths from pollution. That's according to a new analysis from nonprofit independent research group Resources for the Future, which estimates that for every 4 coal jobs that would be protected by the Trump administration's coal plant bailout, 1 American will die a premature death from increased toxic air pollution. And they say that's a conservative estimate.
And I think it needs to be underscored. You call it a coal industry bailout. It really is a coal industry bailout.
Yes, forcing Americans to keep these plants open even though there are more clean and cheaper energy sources available. But some good news, in North Carolina, Duke Energy is now harnessing poo power from the state's huge hog industry, capturing methane from massive hog manure waste lagoons to generate electricity with plans to expand. In New York City, National Grid PLC has opened a pilot plant to burn methane from human wastewater and sewage treatment plants to generate electricity.
What does it say when the only good news stories we can come up with have to do with pig poo and human poo?
Well, there you go.
That's where we are.
Finally, the CEO of oil giant Royal Dutch Shell, Ben van Beurden, has asked the UK government to move up its 2040 target date to ban gasoline-powered cars and to accelerate its transition to electric vehicles. He says doing so more quickly would change consumer attitudes and, quote, make it easier for Shell to make investment decisions going forward. Last October, Shell purchased a UK electric vehicle charging company, and earlier this month, BP bought the UK's biggest EV charging network.
So, to correct my earlier statement, for good news, we not only have to turn to pig poo and human poo, but we also have to laud the CEO of a major oil company.
That's where we are.
What has this world come to? For much more on all of these stories and the ones we couldn't get to today, please check out our website at greennews.bradblog.com. Find us, follow us, and share us worldwide on the Facebooks and the Twitters at Green News Report. I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
And this has been your poo-filled Green News Report.
Take a load off Planty. Take a load for free. Take a load off Planty.
All I can do is ask the question. My people came to me, Dan Coates came to me, and some others. They said they think it's Russia. I have President Putin. He just said it's not Russia. I will say this. I don't see any reason why it would be, but I really do want to see the server. But I have confidence in both parties.
shame, shame, shame on you. Ah, it's a shame, 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 shame the way you do.
Yeah, that's it. Shame, shame. That is exactly what it is. Shame on you. Look, I don't know how you stand there next to Putin knowing you go back to February of this year. The Bloomberg headline, Russia attacked U.S. troops in Syria. We know in February that Russian assets, mercenaries, people at the discretion of Putin attacked our soldiers. We know that. And yet you've got this president, the commander in chief, standing next to the guy who there's no question, there can be no question that Putin gave the order because that's how it's done. At least that's my thoughts. And here to share some of his, I've asked our friend Red T. Raccoon to come talk with us, Army veteran, EMT, and also well-known Twitter commentator. Red, thanks for taking time for us.
Thank you for having me.
So let me ask you this first and foremost, as someone who wore the uniform, what you saw today, Commander-in-Chief, what do you think?
Oh, it makes me absolutely sick. And I know I'm not alone. It's just seeing someone that, you said it right there, is the commander-in-chief of our armed services, is saying this and is not listening to his advisors that are telling him the truth. And, I mean, it's not even lies anymore. It's just blatant disregard for everybody else in the world that's telling him the facts, and he's just coming out and just burying his head in the sand and basically just lying at the mercy of Putin, just standing right there. One of the most dangerous people in the whole entire world.
And you especially after the last couple of days of beating up on our allies, to then go and you play the tough guy to our allies, and then play this kind of this cuck kind of submissive role to Putin. Just I literally in my lifetime never thought that I would ever see an American president do that. For all of I got a bunch of stuff. Well, Obama this, Obama that. Obama never played that role to Putin ever.
Never. And the one person I just keep on thinking about is Ronald Reagan. I mean, what would he be saying right now? I hate to say it, he'd probably take Trump to the back of the shed and give him a little bit of a lesson when it comes to dealing with Russians. And everyone's shocked about what's happening, but we've seen this pattern before coming out of the G7 when he goes and started meeting with Kim Jong-un. This pattern is there. This is what he does. And again, you've talked about it. We saw it the whole entire weekend. It was just the setup, and this is delivery today.
So what does this say to, because I can't imagine that anybody who's wearing a uniform right now can be all that thrilled. What does it do for morale, especially when you've got someone like John Kelly, who is well respected within military ranks, sitting, in those rooms and staying there next to this president?
It creates confusion. That's what it does. It creates uncertainty. It creates a situation where you have soldiers on the ground in Syria that are in harm's way, that, again, you spoke about it right before the break as far as the mercenaries are concerned. There's live threats on the ground right now. I mean, how many times did we talk about it in the past as far as Russians buzzing American ships or coming too close to our coast? This has been happening. There's the Russian ship that's been trolling the East Coast for the past 2 years. These things are taking place, and right now, the one thing that's really scaring me, too, is, it's a double-edged sword. We're alienating our allies when it comes to NATO. And eventually what's going to happen is we're going to pick a fight and we're going to turn around and no one's going to be there.
Yep. No, and that's a very real problem. When I see a country like Germany who says, the rest of us, hey, we've got to be looking elsewhere. That's a concern, because you look, not that Germany sends an awful lot of troops into our endeavors, but everyone else that I worry about going, okay, you're on your own.
And the one thing that's actually really dangerous about this whole entire situation is we have a massive amount of military bases in Germany. A lot of air bases too. A lot of the missions that we fly out of the Middle East actually go in and out of Germany before they get to the Middle East. It is a serious situation when it comes to the European theater. And I think, I don't want to give anybody nightmares before we go to bed at night, but we're running into a situation again where Trump thinks that he has an ally with Putin, but that is never the case at all. And we could be facing a situation where we're going to fight battles on two fronts, one in Asia and one in Europe. And that's not a situation where we're going to be able to go and win. It's not going to be like World War II. Eventually, the bad guys will win sooner or later. And by alienating our allies in NATO and basically alienating the rest of the world, we're going to be stuck by ourselves, and it's not going to be a good situation at all.
Now, I don't think anyone wants, to make Russia an absolute enemy. I don't think we want to be at the kind of loggerheads that I remember growing up, where any minute Reagan could push a button or Khrushchev could push a button and it'd be all over. I don't think anyone wants to go back to that, but you have to admit when you've been attacked. I mean, you have to, and I think all the Republicans have done this. They've all come out and said that the Russians meddled. Our intelligence is very clear. Now you can argue whether meddling and collusion are the same thing, or you could argue all of that stuff. At the end of the day, regardless of what Trump's behavior in this was, or what he did or didn't do, or what Kushner did, or what Idiot Jr. did, or the rest of them, and what they didn't do, it doesn't matter to me. The facts are. There was a cyber attack on this country, and for 18 months, the Republican leadership and this president, the commander-in-chief of this country, did nothing. And in fact, the commander-in-chief is calling it a witch hunt.
Exactly. And I mean, it's so obvious. The indictments that came down this week, they were so clear and to the point, exactly the methodology that they used in order to go and find these guys and figure out exactly what they did. I mean, there's no question in my mind whatsoever that it was Russians that were involved as members of the GRU, which can't go and do things without Putin's involvement as far as this goes. And
this is the other thing I was going to ask you about this, because Putin is a strong arm. He is he's a dictator. He's an authoritarian type. Nothing happens without his approval. Be it the hacking or be it the attacks on our soldiers in Syria, it doesn't happen without his approval. And to have our president stand there and whatever that was is should be more than just distressing.
It is, and I look at it too from a world stage perspective. Who's left to go and defend the world at this point? If you're these other countries and you're looking at supposedly the leader of the free world bowing down to Putin, if you are Lithuania, you're Poland, what do you see as far as that imagery is concerned?
If you're Ukraine,
and Putin's smart. Exactly. And that's the scary thing about this, is that this is a bigger problem when it comes to the Ukraine and it comes to Crimea. And my fear, and sooner or later, is that Trump is going to go and recognize Crimea as part of Russia. And that's going to go and start opening the door for annexations of different countries. Specifically, Georgia is the next on the list. And that's been something that's been going on kind of. It's a tough situation that we're dealing with domestically, is because we have so many things going on here that we don't see a lot of the issues that are going on globally. And it's kind of like we almost got our eyes opened up immediately today. And it's a good thing. We need to be paying attention to these global issues when it comes to, especially with what Putin's been doing as far as influencing other elections too.
No, earlier
there's a lot of things coming out of Mexico.
Earlier I spoke with Andrea Chalupa, and she was talking about Ukraine, and in her podcast she said, in 2016 nobody wanted to talk about Ukraine. And I still say, I say nobody wants to talk about it now, but, it was kind of the testing ground for all of the things that Putin eventually did to us and is going to do again in 2018 if we don't wake up. And what's frustrating is I have, so many people on the right and, the Bernie people on the left saying, well, they didn't change my votes. The Russians didn't do anything to change my mind. And I'm going, they didn't need to change your mind. There's a small enough number of people in this country that decide elections that's where they focused. And, we now know they hacked into the voting rolls and got 500,000 people's names and addresses and partial Social Security numbers and all of that stuff. Not very hard to throw 70,000 votes in 3 states to throw an electoral college election.
No, and it's very interesting how they go about doing this. There's kind of 2 methodologies that you have, and you kind of named them off right there. It's physically going and actually going and changing votes when it comes to a specific number of people. But there's also that social engineering piece where they're getting analytics from a very specific area that may be a swing county within a swing state. And they are sending some of the worst kind of marketing you can ever imagine to these people to go and get them to go and vote a certain way.
Yep.
And it's toxic, and it works wonders. And the sad thing about it is, I mean, I've seen some of these news reports where they're going and confronting some of these people that had Facebook groups that they're associating with that were actually Russian. To this day, they still don't believe it. And I mean, these reporters are handing them information in their hands saying, hey, this is a Russian, from a troll farm that's been feeding you bad information. They're so caught up into it and so caught up into this world of whatever it is. It's almost like a cult at this point that they just can't see out of it.
Yeah, I mean, it's almost like a psycho.
What's going on. Yeah. Oh, it's exactly what it is. And again, the Russians are great at it. This is something that they've been doing for, 50, 60 years. And specifically, the thing with Putin is he's been around for 18 years when it comes to this. Trump's been around for 18 months. There's a big difference as far as what they know what they're doing. They know that they have someone that they can manipulate at this point. And they proved it to the world. They showed it off today.
I remember going back into sometime in the 80s, there was this movie with I think it was John Travolta was in it, where they were, I forget, they were like band members, and they were to go to this town that they thought was somewhere in Middle America and run some kind of a club and all of this. And it turns out they were flown to Russia, and they were supposed to teach these Russian operatives how to be Americans. And this whole town was all these people who thought they were Americans, but they were actually living in Russia, and they were Russians, and because they were training them to be like us and know us and know our fault lines. And I think back to that movie right now quite often and go, they know us better than we know ourselves.
They do. And they use our need to share information against us. It doesn't take long to go start reading through someone's Twitter feed, going through someone's Facebook page, to understand that most Americans are the same. We we get really divisive about issues that are very, timely, and it's very obvious what kind of directions we split into. Historically, we've always been on the same side as far as Republicans and Democrats are concerned. And they just know how to manipulate it so well. And again, a lot of it does have to do with social media itself. There's a lot of fascinating studies, even just memes. It seems harmless, but pictures with words, especially that go and bring up nostalgic ideas, are very powerful. And again, we saw this in the 30s when it came to the rise of fascism in Europe. Again, you're seeing a lot of the similarities because it's human nature, and it goes back to how these strongmen go and manipulate the general public.
So how do we fight back against this? I mean, at the end of the day, we know they're still going to do it because they got away with it. And today, Putin's got to be laughing all the way back to to Moscow. How do we stop it from happening again?
I mean, first is education. Is just letting the general public know that this is out there and that it's something that you have to be cautious about. The second thing, again, it always goes back to everyone talk about voting, but you need to make it a campaign issue. And I think that's kind of the next step. I think voting is great. It actually goes and starts moving people when it becomes a campaign issue. And I think today is a good turning point where we can go and start transitioning this and saying, you know what, we need our politicians to go and start actually making actions against them. And I know Schumer put together a 4-point plan today in regards to what he wants the Republicans to go and do as far as this goes, but it needs to be taken further. We've had hearings and debates in regards to a lot of the hacking. They need to go and start putting more action in place. We've seen some improvements in regards to some of the social media companies. It needs to go further. I know that Twitter took a big hit when it went and started wiping out accounts that they went and suspected. They need to go and start actually going out there and making sure they're going and attacking these as they're coming up. And I think a lot of this is just as easy as just looking at IP addresses when it comes to Moscow. And I know that some of them are going to use intermediaries within Eastern Europe too, but you should be able to go and spot a lot of these. I know there's a lot of people out there that are on Twitter that are doing a lot of this work. If private citizens can do it, that means that Twitter or Facebook can go and do the same.
Yeah, but that's going to cost money, and money is profit.
Yeah. Yep.
And, so you and your democracy, we don't care about. We care about our profits.
It's true, but, at the end of the day, it's good to have the company still around. And again, I keep an eye on the markets too, and I know that Twitter was actually taking a hit, but it rebounded a little bit when it comes to the markets, and because they know it's an issue, it's bad publicity. Facebook is getting dragged through the mud right now in regards to Cambridge Analytica and everything that's happening as far as that piece goes. These companies don't want to do that, and hopefully, knock on wood, that's where kind of free markets take place, and they go and start consumers go and start going with companies that they don't trust. Personally, myself, I would never go back on Facebook.
No, we post just our audio clips. I don't do anything else on there. I haven't for years though. I mean, this has been a couple of years because a lot of the privacy stuff I had a problem with. Every time you'd go to click on something, they wanted access to all your photos and access to all this stuff. I'm like, nope, can't have it.
And now we know why. Exactly. A lot of us kind of picked up on that early. And I think what we do too is a lot of us that are very involved within this are ahead of the curve. What we need to do also is kind of educate the people that are behind us a little bit and help them understand why this is important and why it's so dangerous. We start kind of glazing over when we start hearing Russia so often. You kind of have to break down the different issues when it comes to some of the things that are happening with Russia, and especially with some of these indictments coming down too.
And especially because they're going to be coming fast and furious.
Have to break it down. Exactly. Yeah. And what they're going to be doing is it's not going to be interrelated to specific things. So one thing that everyone kind of keeps on coming back to is the Clinton investigation is not the Trump investigation when it comes to Russian meddling, and it doesn't involve Michael Flynn directly. These things are two separate issues. They get muddled together. That's going to keep on happening. And I mean, we even see it with Putin as far as some of the, I haven't seen a lot of press conferences with Putin, but today I was kind of noticing how he goes and dances around issues. He loves to stir things very, very well. You can see a lot of Trump in him. That's going to keep on happening where truth and lies are going to get muddled together, and you're going to see a lot of just sources out there that are going to just be throwing a lot of information out there, especially on these social media sites like Twitter and Facebook.
And that's why it comes down to, I've always said we've got to go back to talking to each other face to face. We've got to go back to, as my grandfather always said, you believe half of what you hear, and only 80% of what you see. The idea of being, you got to verify, you got to do the diligence.
Yeah. And, it's a little bit off subject, but that's what you're seeing with a lot of these candidates that are so successful right now is a lot of the grassroots face-to-face interaction with the voters, and specifically in their area. You need to go back to the community a little bit. I think that's, as far as kind of the left side is concerned. One thing that I look at the right, and I think that's like a really great piece, is that, again, we talk about religion when we talk about the right, but they're organized as far as churches are concerned, and they're organized as far as community is concerned.
Yeah.
I think the left needs to do a better job as far as that is concerned.
Absolutely agree with you.
These marches are a good start. I think maybe building more community, more, and embracing the faith base as far as the left is concerned too.
I'm there with you. Red, I appreciate the time, the thoughts. Good stuff. Thanks for your time and your ideas.
Hey, thank you.
I appreciate it. Good stuff. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Make sure you email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Send us a note over on Twitter, any of that. Let's take a quick break. Right back. Wrap things up. Stick around. Listen to The Rick Smith Show.
Shame on you for doing me like you do. You saw me yesterday. You turned your head and walked away.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. This day in labor history, the year was 1862. That was the day that black rights activist Ida B. Wells Barnett was born in Holly Springs, Mississippi. She was the oldest of 8 children. Wells went to college and then became a teacher in Memphis, Tennessee. While in Memphis, Ida B. Wells became active in speaking out against black oppression in the Jim Crow South. She was the editor of a black newspaper, the Free Speech and Headlight. She wrote about many of the issues that face the black community, including violence, unequal education facilities, and voter suppression. Taking such a public stand could have disastrous repercussions. She wrote under the pseudonym Iola, but she was fired from her job for writing about the inequities of the segregated Southern education system. Tom Moss, a successful black store owner and friend of Ida B. Wells, was lynched by a white mob. 2 other black men were also lynched for helping him to try and defend his store. Black Southern business owners were seen as potential economic competition and were often the targets of threats, violence, and lynching. Angered by the murders, Ida B. Wells began to research the lynchings. She published the findings of her investigation in her newspaper. Furious white residents destroyed and burned her newspaper office. In danger for her life, Wells left Memphis. Ida moved to Chicago, where she continued her anti-lynching work, documenting how the heinous act happened not only in the South. She helped to found the NAACP. At the first NAACP conference in Atlanta in 1909, Wells spoke, saying, quote, "Time was when lynching appeared to be sectional, but now it is national. A blight upon our nation, mocking our laws, and disgracing our Christianity." Like what you hear? Check out more at laborhistoryin2.com.
Remembering that united we bargain, divided we beg. Rick Smith.
To this battle, take my Union gun. Gonna end this world of slavery, for this war is one you're bound to lose. Are you fascists?
So Janice sent me an email to remind me that the name of the movie I was thinking of, with John Travolta in it back in the 80s, was called The Experts. It was I looked it up on Wikipedia. I've forgotten all about it. It was a $3 million budgeted movie. It made $169,000 back. It was that bad. And it was that farcical that nobody took to it. And the premise was, John Travolta and and I forget who the other guy was, get kidnapped. They're drugged. They're flown to Russia, and they're led to believe that it's this small hick town in Nebraska, and they're going to open up a nightclub, and they're going to teach all of these KGB spies how to be hip Americans, and teach them everything that they need to know, the language, the slang, all of that stuff, so that they can eventually invade. And the sad thing is when they get there, the Russians are still think it's the 1950s. They've been watching too much, Andy Griffith and too much Leave It to Beaver. So when you get these people who are, hipsters in the 80s, and the people who are at the top of the hip chain there, coming in with the people who think it's the 1950s, it's the hijinks begins. I would argue from that point forward, they have learned an awful lot about us. And if you go back, as Red pointed out, these memes that solidify what people already believe. If you're a racist, if you're a homophobe, if the transgender thing was huge, the bathroom thing, you even got my aunt, to chiming in on it. There were a lot of things and a lot of fodder for them to take advantage of and to really hammer people on. And then, through incredible marketing skill. I mean, understand how sophisticated these campaigns have gotten. That you get these Russian military officers who use the same kind of thought process that these marketeers on Madison Avenue or Fifth Avenue think of on how to get you to buy laundry detergent. It's the same kind of thing. They just hammer you and hammer you and hammer you and divide and conquer, and that's what they did. Very successful. And what's kind of worrying to me is what I saw today out of this president. Is scary. I want to know what they did in the back room. I would love to know what the conversation was, what we gave away while there were no cameras or anyone but a translator, and why Trump would demand that it only be a one-on-one meeting. That's the scary stuff. And my fear is his narcissism and his self-confidence or overconfidence is destructive to our future. I mean, it is that kind of danger in my view. Anyway, I'd love to hear your thoughts. You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. If you missed any part of the program, you can download the podcast there. Get the app on your smartphone. Take the program on the go wherever you go. And as I said, email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. I'm going to be talking about this tomorrow again. Sarah Kendzior is going to be here, talk about her podcast, Gaslit Nation, which is something everyone should be checking out. Get that and where you get your podcasts. Thanks so much for being here. We'll see you back here tomorrow.
You've been listening to The Rick Smith Show. Together, we can make America better. Email rick@thericksmithshow.com or interact with us anytime at thericksmithshow.com. Until next time, this has been The Rick Smith Show, where working people come to talk. It's coming.